Hey guys, it's Divest. Today I wanted to talk about the G36 accuracy problems, why they happened, and debunking some of the disinformation out there. I would like to precede this by stating I am a fan of HKs. I actually got my first experience with professional firearms design and manufacturing with HK, and I like most of their guns, including the G36. But I feel the need to set the record straight. So after the end of the Cold War and the failure of the G11 program, the Bundeswehr was looking to replace the G3 with a modern intermediate caliber rifle that could be manufactured domestically, rejecting H&K's offer for the G41, their 5.56 NATO downscaled G3. H&K then went back to the drawing board and developed the G36 with an emphasis on making a low-cost rifle to compete with the Steyr AUG and the East German St. G940. Then during the war in Afghanistan, German forces began to notice that their rifles were unable to maintain accuracy, sometimes reaching up to 40 MOA groups. What that basically means is imagine if you had a circle around your point of aim at 100 meters. You would expect 90% of the shots to land within 40 inches, which is terrible, equivalent to a musket. A modern military rifle with poor accuracy would be around 6 minutes of angle. So the reason for this was simply because of corruption or short-sightedness, depending on how you want to look at it. Due to the extreme budget cuts in the Bundeswehr after reunification, the German government had closed down their own independent weapon-proofing line intended to make sure that the rifles met quality control standards. In addition to having no independent testing, H&K also offered them a new G36 using a different polymer that was significantly cheaper and offered no performance degradation compared to their existing polymers, according to their own words, which they of course couldn't independently test. So a good portion of the G36 production was done, based on the assumption these guns would never be fired in anger and were going to be as cheap as possible with no independent review to make sure they worked as intended. There were already problems visible even back before the infamous Battle of Good Friday. The Capitol Police tested the G36 and it failed miserably, because H&K tried to sell them the cheaper G36 to compete with American gun companies. The reason for the loss of accuracy was because the cheaper polymer would deform from the heat of sustained fire, specifically the polymer the barrel was mated to the receiver in. Normally when you fire a rifle it vibrates and then the barrel comes to rest in the same position as before because of the rigidity of the receiver. But this meant that the muzzle was pointing in a slightly different direction relative to the optic every time. This is called a wandering zero. A slight variation over 100 meters makes your rifle practically useless. This almost exclusively involved rifles sold to the German government. Foreign customers like Spain, Saudi Arabia, and Latvia got rifles that weren't defective because they used the original polymer, which was heat-resistant. That's all there really was to it. Many of the German rifles didn't meet quality control standards because of a poorly thought-out cost-cutting measure. But there is a lot of disinformation on the topic, between gun tubers and bots in comment sections that spam disinformation constantly about the rifle. The gun tubers have a conflict of interest because they rely on advertising from gun companies, and so they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them by talking negatively about any gun company. It's bad optics, and even if Hong Kong wasn't paying them, they'll take a hit from other advertisers. A common trope I saw was for them to test their own G36 and demonstrate it worked fine even after sustained fire. This is called the McNamara fallacy. On the other end of the spectrum, Ian McCollum claimed that all rifles are subject to accuracy shift after sitting out under the sun, and that the Bundeswehr had unrealistic expectations of accuracy for the rifle because of German engineering, and that it would have been fine if it was only used in Germany as originally built. It's true that rifles will experience some shift, but this would be negligible if the rifle was constructed to a good standard, which Ian should already know. Beyond that, the Battle of Good Friday was fought in overcast conditions that reached a high of 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit in Kunduz province, Afghanistan. I know Germany is at the same latitude as Canada, but it's not an Arctic climate. The literal coldest place in Germany, the Funtensee, reaches average temperatures of 17 degrees Celsius, 63 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, meaning that if Ian was correct, then rifling would be a waste of time because barrel shift would make every gun practically as accurate as a smoothbore anyways. Either Ian was ignorant of the difference between Iraq and Afghanistan, or he assumed he could get away with that because of the ignorance of his audience. Also, he got to make YouTube videos in the H&K Museum showing off the G11 and XM8 afterwards, showing a clear conflict of interest. The bots lauding the G36 are also obvious when you know what to look for too. Otherwise, between the 150 armed engagements the Germans fought in Afghanistan, there were tens of thousands of veterans of those engagements who have nothing better to do but write on English-language forums defending H&K. And if it gets brought up, they will also start attacking Haenel for patent theft. Their arguments rely on them both being an expert in firearms design and completely ignorant of it at the same time, because they cite things like being able to swap parts between the MK556 and the HK416, which is something that you can do with almost every AR-15, because the only reason to have proprietary dimensions on your rifle is to make it more difficult to modify. They also like to point out that Haenel is owned by Arabs, which really just means that Arabs are investing in German industry, while they're also ignoring the fact that the ownership of H&K is completely opaque and is tracked back to a dummy corporation in Luxembourg, whose only asset is a P.O. box. This is also funny too, because if they think the G36 is the greatest rifle ever, then why would they want the government to waste money on testing and buying a new AR-15 clone when they could have spent that money upgrading the G36? They also blame Ursula von der Leyen for the controversy, even though the investigation started before she was made Minister of Defense. Of course, if these are just bots trying to defend H&K and try to shift public opinion in favor of the company because they have business interests in the English-speaking world, it makes more sense. It doesn't matter if H&K has one of their rifles replaced with another one, because both ways they get paid. But to an actual German who actually knows anything about guns and has actually been hovering around these decisions, it's obvious that these bots are fakes. But we can cut through the narratives by looking at the court case surrounding the G36, a lawsuit against H&K launched by the German government. H&K refused to honor the warranty they had sold with the G36 to fix the rifle when the government told them to, so they were taken to court. And they openly admitted what had happened. H&K's defense wasn't that there was nothing wrong with the rifles or that it would be impossible to meet the standards demanded by the military, like their white knights claim. The defense was that their warranty didn't stipulate they had to make sure the rifle met a certain degree of accuracy, so they acknowledged there was a problem, but said it wasn't their responsibility and they weren't going to fix it. Which is why the government decided to replace the G36 with what should ostensibly be a functionally identical 5.56 rifle. It was an effort to diversify away from H&K due to their duplicitous business practices against the backdrop of increased global tension. So Ursula von der Leyen's opinion on the topic was that corruption in arms procurement needed to be stamped out because their military couldn't issue useless rifles. No one's actions make sense unless there was something wrong with the G36, which is why the historical negationism that H&K fanboys throw out falls apart if you actually research the topic or just know anything about how guns work. With that said, thanks for listening. Let me know if you want to argue in the comments so I can dunk on you. Until next time, this has been Divest.